Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Welcome to Bhagavad Gita Circle for today, and we are continuing with Bhagavad Gita chapter 6, which is entitled Dhyana Yoga, text 18. Madam Suya is a little tied up as it relates to her work, so she may come later, but she's asked me to at least start off, and I may be the one to continue the whole way through. It's a little bit hectic on that side. As far as reading and explaining today, that will be done by Mother Gita from Atlanta. Hare Krishna, Mother, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. And thank you for your interest in this particular service. Hare Krishna. Please take over.
Thank you so much. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatharine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Jadvaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, text number 18. Yada viniyatam chittam atmani eva vitisthate nishpraha sarva kamebhyo yukta iti uchyate tada. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. When the yogi, by practice of yoga, disciplines his mental activities and becomes situated in transcendence, devoid of all material desires, he is said to be well established in yoga. Purport. The activities of the yogi are distinguished from those of an ordinary person by his characteristic cessation from all kinds of material desires, of which sex is the chief. A perfect yogi is so well disciplined in the activities of the mind that he can no longer be disturbed by any kind of material desire. This perfectional stage can automatically be attained by persons in Krishna consciousness, as stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 4, verses 18 through 20. Savai manha Krishna padaravindayor vacham sivaikuntha gunanu varnane karau harer mandira marjanadishu shrutim chakara achyuta satkathodaye Mukunda Lingalaya Darshane Dvishau Tadbhritya Gatra Sparshi Anga Sangamam Grihanam Cha Tad Pad Saroja Saurabhe Shrimad Tulasaya Rasanam Tad Arpite Padau Hare Kshetra Padanus Pane Shiro Rishikesha Padabhivandane Kamam Cha Dasye Natu Kama Kamayad Yathottama Shloka Janashraya Ratihi. King Ambarish first of all engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Then, one after another, he engaged his words in describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord, his hands in mopping the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing of the activities of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the transcendental forms of the Lord, his body in touching the bodies of the devotees, his sense of smell in smelling the scents of the lotus flowers offered to the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulasi leaf offered at the lotus feet of the Lord, his legs in going to places of pilgrimage and the temple of the Lord, his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in executing the mission of the Lord. All these transcendental activities are quite befitting a pure devotee. This transcendental stage may be inexpressible subjectively by the followers of the impersonalist path, but it becomes very easy and practical for a person in Krishna consciousness, as is apparent in the above description of the engagements of Maharaj Ambarish. Unless the mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord by constant remembrance, such transcendental engagements are not practical. In the devotional service of the Lord, therefore, these prescribed activities are called archana, or engaging all the senses in the service of the Lord. The senses and the mind require engagements. Simple abnegation is not practical. Therefore, for people in general, especially those who are not in the renounced order of life, transcendental engagement of the senses and the mind, as described above, is the perfect process for transcendental achievement, which is called yukta in the Bhagavad Gita. Text 19. Yatha dipo nivatastho ningate sopama smrita yogino yata chittasya yunjato yogam atmanaha. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. As a lamp in a windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist, whose mind is controlled, remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendent self. Purport. A truly Krishna conscious person, always absorbed in transcendence, in constant, undisturbed meditation on his worshipable Lord, is as steady as a lamp in a windless place. Text 20 to 23. Yatro paramate chittam niruddham yoga sevaya yatra chaivatmanatmanam pashyan atmani tushyati sukham atyantikam yattad buddhi grahyam atindriyam veti yatra na chaivayam sthitash chalati tatvatah yam ladva chaparam labham manyatenadhikam tatah yasmin sthito na dukkhena gurunapi vichalayate tam vidya dukkha samyoga viyogam yoga samyutam. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. In the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. Purport. By practice of yoga, one becomes gradually detached from material concepts. This is the primary characteristic of the yoga principle. And after this, one becomes situated in trance or samadhi, which means that the yogi realizes the supersoul through transcendental mind and intelligence without any of the misgivings of identifying the self with the super self. Yoga practice is more or less based on the principles of the Patanjali system. Some unauthorized commentators try to identify the individual soul with the super soul, and the monists think this to be liberation, but they do not understand the real purpose of the Patanjali system of yoga. There is an acceptance of transcendental pleasure in the Patanjali system, but the monists do not accept this transcendental pleasure out of fear of jeopardizing the theory of oneness. The duality of knowledge and knower is not accepted by the non-dualist, but in this verse, transcendental pleasure realized through transcendental senses is accepted. And this is corroborated by Patanjali Muni, the famous exponent of the yoga system. The great sage declares in his Yoga Sutra 4.34, Purushartha Shunyanam Gunanam Prati Prashavaha Kaivalyam Swarupa Pratishtha Va Chitti Shakti Iti. This Chitta Shakti or internal potency is transcendental. Purusartha means material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and at the end, the attempt to become one with the Supreme. This oneness with the Supreme is called Kaivalyam by the monist, but according to Patanjali, this Kaivalyam is an internal or transcendental potency by which the living entity becomes aware of his constitutional position. In the words of Lord Chaitanya, this state of affairs is called Cheto Darpanam Marjanam, or clearance of the impure mirror of the mind. This clearance is actually liberation, or Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam. The theory of nirvana, also preliminary, corresponds with this principle. In the Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10, verse 6, this is called Swarupena Vyavasthitihi. The Bhagavad Gita also confirms the situation in this verse. After nirvana, or material cessation, there is the manifestation of spiritual activities or devotional service to the Lord, known as Krishna consciousness. In the words of the Bhagavatam, Swarupena Vyavasthitihi, this is the real life of the living entity. Maya, or illusion, is the condition of spiritual life contaminated by material infection. Liberation from this material infection does not mean destruction of the original eternal position of the living entity. Patanjali also accepts this by his words, Kaivalyam Swarupar Patishtha Va Chiti Shakti Riti. This Chiti Shakti, or transcendental pleasure, is real life. This is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.12 as Anandamayo Bhayasat. This natural transcendental pleasure is the ultimate goal of yoga and is easily achieved by execution of devotional service or bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga will be vividly described in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. In the yoga system, as described in this chapter, there are two kinds of samadhi called Sampraknata Samadhi and Asampraknata Samadhi. When one becomes situated in the transcendental position by various philosophical researchers, he is said to have achieved Sampraknata Samadhi. In the Asampraknata Samadhi, there is no longer any connection with mundane pleasure, for one is then transcendental to all sorts of happiness derived from the senses. When the yogi is once situated in that transcendental position, he is never shaken from it. Unless the yogi is able to reach this position, he is unsuccessful. Today's so-called yoga practice, which involves various sense pleasures, is contradictory. A yogi indulging in sex and intoxication is a mockery. Even those yogis who are attracted by the siddhis or perfections in the process of yoga are not perfectly situated. If yogis are attracted by the byproducts of yoga, then they cannot attain the stage of perfection as stated in this verse. Persons, therefore, indulging in the make-show practice of gymnastic feats or siddhis should know that the aim of yoga is lost in that way. The best practice of yoga in this age is Krishna consciousness, which is not baffling. A Krishna conscious person is so happy in his occupation that he does not aspire after any other happiness. There are many impediments, especially in this age of hypocrisy, to practicing Hatha Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. But there is no such problem in executing Karma Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. As long as the material body exists, one has to meet the demands of the body, namely eating, sleeping, defending, and mating. But a person who is in pure Bhakti Yoga or in Krishna consciousness does not arouse the senses while meeting the demands of the body. Rather, he accepts the bare necessities of life, making the best use of a bad bargain, and enjoys transcendental happiness in Krishna consciousness. He is callous toward incidental occurrences such as accidents, disease, scarcity, and even the death of a most dear relative. But he is always alert to execute his duties in Krishna consciousness or Bhakti Yoga. Accidents never deviate him from his duty. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 14, Agamapaino nityas tam statikshasva bharata. He endures all such incidental occurrences because he knows that they come and go and do not affect his duties. In this way, he achieves the highest perfection in yoga practice. Text 24. Sanishchayena yuktavyo yogo nirvanna chetasa sankalpa bhagavan kamams tyaktva sarvan asheshataha manasaivandriya gramam viniyamya Purnena Samantataha. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. One should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with determination and faith and not be deviated from the path. One should abandon, without exception, all material desires born of mental speculation and thus control all the senses on all sides by the mind. Purport. The yoga practitioner should be determined and should patiently prosecute the practice without deviation. One should be sure of success at the end and pursue this course with great perseverance, not becoming discouraged if there is any delay in the attainment of success. Success is sure for the rigid practitioner. Regarding Bhakti Yoga, Rupa Goswami says, Utsahan nishchaya dharya tat tat karma pravartana sanga tyaga sato vritehe sadbir bhakti prasiddhyati. One can execute the process of Bhakti Yoga successfully with full-hearted enthusiasm, perseverance, and determination by following the prescribed duties in the association of devotees and by engaging completely in activities of goodness. Upadeshamrita 3. As for determination, one should follow the example of the sparrow who lost her eggs in the waves of the ocean. A sparrow laid her eggs on the shore of the ocean, but the big ocean carried away the eggs on its waves. The sparrow became very upset and asked the ocean to return her eggs. The ocean did not even consider her appeal. So the sparrow decided to dry up the ocean. She began to pick out the water in her small beak, and everyone laughed at her for her impossible determination. The news of her activity spread, and at last Garuda, the gigantic bird carrier of Lord Vishnu, heard it. He became compassionate toward his small sister bird, and so he came to see the sparrow. Garuda was very pleased by the determination of the small sparrow, and he promised to help. Thus Garuda at once asked the ocean to return her eggs, lest he himself take up the work of the sparrow. The ocean was frightened at this and returned the eggs. Thus the sparrow became happy by the grace of Garuda. Similarly, the practice of yoga, especially Bhakti Yoga in Krishna consciousness, may appear to be a very difficult job. But if anyone follows the principles with great determination, the Lord will surely help, for God helps those who help themselves. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I was so engrossed in reading and you're reading and enjoying it so much, I didn't realize it was getting to 6:20 that fast. But thank you very much for reading. So devotees, this is the time when if anyone can want to ask a question, they can unmute and ask the question, or they can go to reactions and hit raise hand, and I'll look to see if somebody's done that. Right now, I don't see any person, but I have one question here. So when you were reading the first text, in the purport, Maharaj Ambarish was cited by Srila Prabhupada as using his senses, practically all senses and mind, in service of Krishna. Very good example for all of us. My question is, though, for those who work, do kami jobs, the type of jobs that on the job, they're not doing things that are devotional, how can they engage their senses as best so they don't lose out in what Maharaj Ambarish benefited from so much?
Yes, this is a very practical question. And when I had read this, I had inquired from my spiritual master, I am going 9-to-5 job, and, I have to take care of my child, my mother-in-law, have so many chores to do. What should I do? Because this is not practical. So he suggested that do as much as it's possible. Make sure that, laziness does not seep in. Sometimes we say, okay, I don't have time, so I don't have to do this, or this. I'll just do bare minimum. So he said, you make sure that you put in your full effort to do as much as you can. And then the remaining time, you can also do mental service. Mentally, you can do the service if you're not able to, physically do it. So whenever you are working and get a break, in your job, you get those coffee breaks or lunch breaks or whatever, then you can try and, remember the pastimes of Krishna and try and do some mental service. We have a very nice example of that Brahman who was very, very poor and could not offer anything to the Lord. So one day he heard in a lecture that he could do mental service, and he sat down after taking a bath in the holy river, he sat down and he meditated, and he started preparing nice kheer for the Lord. He, mentally, he put the milk and the rice and the sugar, and then he was making it all the time thinking about Krishna. And then when the kheer was ready, he put it in a nice bowl made of gold. In his mind, he's thinking, let me offer it in a cup which is made of gold. And then he was thinking, he said, oh, I just made the sweet rice, let me check if it is too hot for the Lord to eat. And as soon as he put his finger mentally, ouch, his finger was burnt. That powerful his mental meditation was, cooking for the Lord. So just that service itself, so if we are unable to, physically, we should do as much as possible, but then remaining part we can do mental service also. I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. As a matter of fact, I won't put it that way, but as you was, there's something personal that I wanted to talk about, but it's kind of connected to this. But that was just my Guru Maharaj's mercy. I just come new to Krishna consciousness, and I was in the Maryland area at the time, and working in Baltimore, just outside Baltimore, Maryland. But I had gotten my first Bhagavad Gita, and boy, I was just excited about everything that from the first time I was reading from it. So much so that, of course, I couldn't read because, during work time, being in front of chemicals and, working with chemicals in the chemistry lab. But there was a lunch break. And my lunch break, I would take the Bhagavad Gita and go and sit in a place that's really in the corner, far away from my, co-workers, and just had my lunch, but I was just eating it up. Just, one thing after another, very fascinated about the sciences of soul. So as we were reading, I was actually, my mind got to that scene, and I benefited tremendously for it. I still have that particular Bhagavad Gita. Oh, and something funny also, I thought that there were important points. I'm trained when you read a book and the things are good, you just highlight that. So I started highlighting it, Bhagavad Gita. It didn't take me long to stop because I realized I was going to highlight page after page after page, everything in there is so relevant. The way Prabhupada had written the purport on it, not to mention Krishna's, main points to mention about spirituality. So yes, it's very, very, very interesting, how sometimes we find ways. If you're really excited, you can find ways.
Actually, okay. I just remembered something that my husband used to do when he was working. And whenever he would get time, he would, he's a computer engineer, so he would keep his computer book, right in front, but behind would be Bhagavad Gita. And so he would be reading Bhagavad Gita, but everyone would think he's reading the computer book. Of course, he would do that after he finished his work. That would not, be a hindrance for his work. He would finish his work and then, he would just keep the Bhagavad Gita hidden and start reading.
There is something in the chat that I'd like to read for you. This is from Havre to the Havre family, one of them. Hare Krishna Mataji, while siddhis are byproduct of Bhakti Yoga journey, though it is not necessarily valued by sadhakas, I'm curious if there are any indicators to identify if the sadhaka has gathered some of the siddhis.
Yeah. I remember one pastime of Srila Prabhupada. I don't know if it would answer your question, but so Srila Prabhupada had asked disciples, to chant in the morning, and he would talk, give lecture every morning, a class, and then, so many different aspects of knowledge. So then he had also talked about how pure devotees, they experience ecstasy, what are the symptoms of ecstasy, crying unnecessarily without any reason, or laughing, rolling on the ground, and hair standing on end, etc., etc. So one day one disciple came to Srila Prabhupada and said, you know what, this chanting that I'm doing is so powerful, my hair stands on end and I start laughing. So he said, what should I do? So Srila Prabhupada said, just keep chanting and all this will go away. Indirectly trying to tell him all this is not important. You just have to concentrate on attentive chanting. So similarly, the devotees, the sadhakas, they are not looking to get some siddhis. They are not looking to becoming mystic yogis or anything. That is not on their mind. So, I don't know if I answered your question. Maybe Parikshit Prabhu can add to it.
Krishna. Well, I think it's answered well, but this will be for the family who wrote that in the chat to actually respond to that, unless they can at this point unmute and also comment on it. Is this satisfactory?
Yes, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna Mataji. Just wanted to understand if there are any indicators that, I mean, of course, nobody pays attention to that, but maybe if somebody has a perspective of, okay, I'm on the right track or not, right? And so these are like in the roadmap could be some milestones he can look at, though he will not exercise or she will not exercise it, but at least that's kind of a confirmation that they are going and they are progressing. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just thought if that was a kind of an indicator for them. So,
well, Mother Gita really answered it quite to the point, using this very nice and humorous way Srila Prabhupada handled this whole thing about mystic cities. Devotees aren't looking to acquire mystic cities. Some of our leaders may even have mystic cities. Srila Prabhupada himself may have had mystic cities, but he never made it a point where people would see himself as a miracle maker. That's not the point. He's just trying to get those of us who are conditioned souls to connect with Krishna's instructions and be happy, internally happy, and then go back to Godhead. That was, what was important for him, rather than this other, because these mystic cities they are material, but they are subtle material. They're subtle material, those abilities. So that's not important. Chanting and chanting attentively and also obeying instructions of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita are actually more important. Hare Krishna.
And also to get these siddhis, one has to, perform Ashtanga Yoga for a very, 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 very long time, and the goal of such yogis is just to get these siddhis, to acquire these siddhis, like becoming smaller than the smallest, lighter than the lightest, all those siddhis. So that is, Prabhupada says, for bhakti yogis, they are not concerned about these siddhis. So,
and it takes a long time, as Mother Gita mentioned. Actually, Rana Maharaj had talked about it one time in a lecture and said that to acquire one of these in the Himalayas, it take you about 12 years. To acquire eight of them is 96 years, but that's your whole life practically. That's gone. So it's not important. The devotees don't take it so seriously, even if it's there. Hare Krishna. So any last questions from devotees? Good question, though. It's opening people's eyes about the mystic cities and where they place in a person's mind that is trying to progress in Krishna consciousness. It doesn't really place much. You get it, fine. You have it, fine. You don't, you don't. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Momina says that she used to read Nectar of Instruction in between work, which is good.
Oh yeah. That's that was very important. Nectar of Instruction is so much in between. Hare Krishna. Any other questions or comments? Either in the chat or
Dhir Krishna Prabhu has a comment, but maybe he can elaborate on that.
He says, I've heard so many stories from devotees who closely serve their spiritual masters that are mystical in nature and beyond logical explanations. Ah. Yes, there's quite a few. There's quite a few. Srila Prabhupada's disciples have mentioned some things about that. I remember Bhakti Churu Swami mentioned some things that he wanted to, he was asked to get some boga, and there was one particular item that he did not get, but he didn't want Srila Prabhupada to know. So when he came, he thought, Srila Prabhupada would accept that he had gotten everything when he said they had gotten everything. Srila Prabhupada asked to see the boga. Eventually you realize you can't get around it, So he was making a point to people know that you got to be straightforward to a spiritual master. You tried to Prabhupada, so he maybe has a mystic series. He never really showed so much, but to help us to grow, to help us to grow. So this was the pastime that between Bhakti Churu Swami and the spiritual master Srila Prabhupada. The Bhakti Churu Swami himself said it to make the point that you have to come honestly to your spiritual master. Hare Krishna. Any other comments or questions? Okay, if they're not, we thank everybody for coming on today to hear Mother, and especially for Mother Gita for reading so wonderfully and answering questions so practically for all of us. So until the next time, which is Wednesday, we have another one. Vanchakalpatarubhascha kripa sindhave evacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vaishnava Thakur ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Glory to Srila Prabhupada.